Welcome back to the Dynamic Life Cycles podcast. This week we have a guest I've wanted to get on and talk to for a long time. You might recognize her voice from her own podcast, Detours. Mel Webb has travelled the globe on her bike telling stories from the ultra bikepacking world for a long time, and we dive deep into her backstory and talk about a bunch of different topics, from her first ultra ride to women in sports to how she mentally gets through the highs and lows of some of the longer rides. If you enjoy the chat as much as I did, get on and give it a 5-star review to help me grow the podcast and reach out to many more like-minded people. As always, don't hesitate to reach out and get in touch with myself, as I'm always down to chat. Enjoy your listen. All right, Mel, how are you?
I'm good. Better now.
It's the end of the day. It's always nice. Did you get out for a ride today?
No ride today. It was rain. Well, I had like work stuff all day, and then I was like, okay, before this, I'll get on the trainer.
Yeah.
And I had to swap the cassette on the trainer, and then I was like, oh, I don't want to like rush and be super sweaty sitting here, so I didn't ride.
And you're a bit of a trainer extraordinaire, I want to say. I hear that you enjoy the trainer.
Okay, trainer extraordinaire is a stretch, but I don't know if I'm ashamed to tell you that I love the trainer or if no, I'm proud of it. I really like the trainer. I will say that I prefer to ride outside, but yes, I like the trainer.
What? So, like, I've done many hours on the trainer. What do you like about the trainer? Because I feel like there's so many different things people talk about. Is it because of like the virtual reality thing, or
No.
are you doing just training sessions on there, or what are you doing?
Um I think like for me, especially as the seasons change, like I will, if I'm in the habit of riding and like in a good, either good training cycle or I'm in a good way with it mentally, like I have no problem getting out the door. But if I'm like right now, I'm coming off of a month off of riding, and when I'm like, it's a bit wet, it's going to take me like 30 minutes to get ready. The trainer is such an easy way to build habit because it's like, okay, great, I can go and get like a really efficient 45 to 90 minutes of just easy riding. Whereas to do that same amount of easy riding outside, I have to be out there longer. It takes longer to get ready. The bike requires a bit more prep. And if you're out of the habit, all those are just like excuses for not making it happen. So when I'm at the beginning stages of training, like I love the trainer because I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, it's easy. Like it's super easy to just get out on ride. You don't really have to pay attention to cars or kit or anything like that. Um, that's the main reason I love it, is just habit. And then it's so efficient. It's
It
so
is.
efficient, especially when you're doing like trying to get in a lot of volume around like life and everything. Like you can get a really good workout in on the trainer where instead of like faffing around outside. There's good times for that too, but those are my main
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think like especially how when you say how efficient it is and how easy it is, like I fully get that in winter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like coming from Australia where it's just like so easy just to go outside and ride. Very rarely do you need to put on more than 2 or 3 layers at most. It's almost like the worst bit is working out the layers to be able to take them off in Australia versus here. It's like trying to stay dry, trying not to get cold, and you're right. It does take like half an hour versus you could literally be on the trainer for that whole time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it. I fully get it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was funny. Like I think you mentioned it in I can't remember which podcast. It was a pretty recent podcast. You mentioned how you're excited for the trainer season. I'm like, I have to take a jab at that one to start with. But
Well, it's funny because my partner hates the trainer, and I'm always like, oh, like it'd be so nice to have somebody to ride beside. Like, I kind of like when someone else is doing a workout beside me. I find that motivating. And he's like, no, get fucked. Like, I'm going
yeah,
outside. You're on your own. Enjoy
yeah.
your little piece of hell. And I'm like, all right, fine. I'll put my pop music on and just have a party. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I actually I have a feeling that like Jake and my riding racing has probably crossed paths enough times. I don't know Jake
Probably.
personally or anything like that, but I feel like understanding what he's gone through and his training and stuff in his past, he's probably much like me, and it's just like he's almost been, you know, when you have like too much vodka or too much alcohol one night and you just like you swear off it. You just like you feel sick by thinking about it. That's almost how I feel like about the trainer.
That's
I'm sure he's like somewhat the same, I'm sure.
You've nailed it. That's exactly how he feels. He's like, I've done enough winters of this shit, like I'm not doing it
Yeah.
with you, but you seem to be enjoying it, so power to you.
Yeah.
Like you do it.
Yeah, exactly. And like to the point that the last couple of years I've been doing the grouse grind or like BCMC through winter. I
Yeah.
won't do it through summer because I don't need to, but just so I don't have to go on the trainer. Like literally I'll
Oh.
change and then I'll just like go hike in the snow just once or twice a week, and that will be like what I would normally do on the trainer, I guess, is like the alternative. And it's like quite funny.
I need to do
But
both those things. That is like I shouldn't say my number one thing. I've got like a million and one things I want to work on this winter, but I'm like the worst hike-a-biker, and yet I pick races where there's hike-a-bike because I enjoy it, but I'm slow. And so I'm like, I need to hike more this winter. So I should maybe like swap a trainer for a grouse grind.
yeah. Yeah, well, the it all started for myself with the like grouse grind side of things with Michelle Schaefer. A few years back, she's gonna love this story, but a few years back she was doing it almost 2 or 3 times a week, and then I had a bunch of issues with getting permanent residency, so I wasn't working. So she'd just like ring me at these random times and was like, "Hey, I'm going up there. Do you want to come?" And it'd be like literally like a 20-minute like, "Hey, I'm going." I'll be like, "All right, I'm sitting around home." So I don't even know how many times I did it that winter, but it was ridiculous. And it was
Yeah.
probably the fittest I've ever been. But so maybe we need to get the three of us up there hiking. And it's sort of like
Yeah.
it was good because some days she was like way more energetic than I was, and vice versa. So yeah, it was nice.
Yeah, Michelle
But
is she's a mountain goat though. I really don't like following her up mountains, but I love the energy, so it's kind of like you trade one off for the other.
yeah, yeah, you'll have when you see her, you'll have to ask her about the snowball fights and how upset she used to get when the other people that we were with used to have snowball fights and would trap her in between us, and she would always be the one that would get covered in snow. It was quite funny.
That's
But
awesome.
um, anyway, I guess yeah, the big reason for getting you on is I've had a bunch of different people ask to get you on, chat about your story. You obviously have your own podcast with
Yeah.
the Detours podcast, but everybody kept saying that yes, you talk about yourself a little bit, and I feel the same because obviously I talk about myself a little bit, but they don't know the full story, the backstories, the hows and whys, and
Hmm.
I sort of understand a little bit of what you've gone through, but just run me through how did you get into cycling? Because from what I understand, you're a marathon runner before all of this happened.
Yeah,
So, like, yeah, where did that come from?
I'll admit I was never like a very good marathon runner, but that was my passion at the time. I mean, my history with bikes goes back a long way, but never in a serious capacity. It was always a form of transportation, like getting to rowing practice in undergrad. But I was running like what, seriously for like a hobby, whatever. Um, and then I moved out west. I was running with a group, was like, okay, Boston Marathon, that's like my dream, da da da. Most marathon runners, that's what they're going after. And
Mm,
I was like finally out of an injury cycle and a really good running cycle. And in January 2020, I like smashed my tibia plateau skiing. And so for people who are like, what is your tibia plateau? It's like the weight bearing bone right underneath your kneecap. and I cracked the corner of it right off and had a broken leg. So I was like, okay, well, obviously you go through like the rehab of broken leg, and the surgeon was like, I'm telling him like, oh, I'm gonna run a marathon in September and it's January, and he's like looking at me like his eyes are rolling to the back of his head, being like, these, like, you're crazy. And he's like, well, you have a plate and 5 screws in your right leg, like that's not going to feel good when you're running, and like the rehab's really serious, like maybe you should just like dial your ambitions back. And I was like, you don't know who I am. Like, I literally said this. I said this to a surgeon. I was like, you don't know who I am, and it would benefit your patients to have more positivity. Like, you don't know the power of a positive mindset. I was just going off on this guy, telling him that, like, if you dream it and will it into existence, it will happen. And he's like, all right, fine. And like, to be fair to myself, I did do a really great job of rehabbing. I had an amazing team that was like really supportive through COVID virtually. Like, my community rallied behind me. It was crazy. Like, I was like, oh my God, I'm actually going to run a fall marathon. Then I started running, and it hurt so much to do it. Like the amount of effort that it requires to get running fit is a beast in itself. And then to like have that metal in your leg and then go through all of it. So I was like, okay, I can only run for 20 to 30 minutes. That's really not going to get me to a marathon. So no, it's like,
I've been in that position. I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah. So then I was like, well, I need to be more active than this. Like, I'm losing my brain. So I started riding my road bike more, and it like coincided with lockdown, which, like, without giving you the full like leg break story and all of that, but like I was in lockdown for 6 to 7 weeks before everybody else was, because I had a broken leg and couldn't walk. So I was training for lockdown, and then lockdown happened, and I was like, I've already been here for 2 months, everybody. Like, I'm ready to break free. So I was
Yeah.
like really big into riding my road bike, and it just wasn't enough to be like on city streets. So I bought what I thought was a gravel bike. It was a cross bike, but it did the job for me. And I started like riding Fisherman's all the time and Pacific Spirit, and I was like, okay, I'm hooked. And that was the end of the running. I pretty quickly after that was like, I'm a cyclist now. Running is something that, I don't know, weird people who think running's fun do.
That's fair. Yeah, it just makes me laugh because I don't know if I've ever told this story. I've definitely told it to people, but not to very many. But when you talk about like running fit,
Mm-hmm.
I used to date a girl that was a very good trail runner,
Yeah.
and she'd get upset, and I'm sure like same thing, like Jake can probably just like jump in and just do things because he's got an engine.
Oh,
And we're at a trail running race, and they're all complaining about how slow they ran and how they didn't do as fast a speed or whatever. And I asked them, I'm like, hey, like, what did you do for training? And they're like, oh, we just did long distance runs. And I'm like, that's why, like, you need to do these sprints and things like that. And then somebody in the background was like, oh, if it's so easy, you do it. So I kind of like stabbed myself in the foot a little bit. And then went into this like secret training regime, turned all of my like Strava to private, everything, so no one knew,
secret. I love that. Why did it have to be secret?
because they all thought that I was just this dumb cyclist. And then
Fair.
I I turned up, so like did the training, did the full workout, like on training peaks, followed the routine, did all the sprints. And I think the deal was I just had to run a half marathon, and there was no like expectation, but I had to run it.
Mm-hmm.
So I put the expectation on myself to try and do a top 100 of the Sydney half marathon, and I
Okay.
just missed out. But what happened was I ended up being one of the fastest half marathon runners in the local club, and it like everyone was like either super stoked that I turned up and did so well, but then on the other hand, everyone was super annoyed that I did so well as well, and it was quite funny.
I'd
But
be mad. I'd be
yeah,
so mad. I mean,
yeah,
I'd
it
be
was,
like stoked for you, but mad.
yeah, that's what it was. It was like everyone was like outwardly stoked, but you could tell they were just so pissed on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about like running fit, like at the time I was a Cat 1 road racer.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, this is good. Like I've got an engine, but holy, like there was no way. Like I'd run 5 kilometers and just couldn't walk the next day. It took me, like I literally did a 12-week training block to get ready for this half marathon. So it was like full legit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was so funny because then like my girlfriend at the time was just wetting herself every day. I'd like wake up and I'd be like hobbling down the stairs. Like, yeah, it was so funny. So
That's
I fully get it.
fantastic.
But
Yeah.
so then once you started getting into the like cycling and you're doing more and more of these gravel rides and things like that, how did that transition from just being like an amateur cyclist to then like full blown bike packer? Because I feel like there's this common story with a lot of bikepacking people I talk to,
Yeah.
whether it's like Mel Hakkinen or like a bunch of other people I've spoken to in this world, that it's like you just, I don't know, there's almost like there's no cycling history behind it. It's just you get in, you start cycling, you're like, yeah, I like this, and then you just cycle for like hundreds to thousands of kilometers at a time, and nobody thinks twice about it. But then you look at someone like myself, or I'm going to keep referring to Jake here, but
Yeah.
like like us, or even like Joe Nation that just won like the Silk Mountain Road Race, and we're kind of more like, I don't know, general like grew up cycling type people. I don't know, is what how did that happen?
It's I mean, I think it was part of the like the desire to not be riding in the on the road. Like definitely go heading off road, and then I just like I would see I think it was really the Silk Road Mountain Race video, like the film they put out on the first race, that really kind of turned me on to like the world of bikepacking. Um, no, that's a lie, actually. It was I somehow stumbled across like a piece of news about a guy who lived in the Rockies, Ryan Corey, and he had written this book, Bikepacking the Canadian Rockies. He has like tragically since passed away from cancer, but anyways, he created these routes, these incredible routes, and that was really the thing that I was like, oh, I want to go see these things. And then at the same time of like exploring the world of bikepacking, then there was the Silk Road film. So those things kind of coincided. But I mean, what gives me like the audacity to ride that far? I don't know, just being like a stubborn person and desire to see things. Like I just was like, these are things I want to see and I want to be in it. So I guess naturally I have to just ride my bike that far to do it. Like when I think
Mm.
about, I want to be on my bike and experiencing these things. So if it's going to take, 200 kilometers to do it, then whatever, I might be slow and that's fine.
Yeah, like I get it a little bit. Like I've done
You don't get it. You're like, what the heck?
no, no, I do. And I'm like, as I say, like every time I speak to somebody that has got a similar story that they've just jumped straight in, it's always like that interesting question of like, why or how.
Yeah.
And even for myself, like I've done 24-hour solo rides, and like I think, yeah, I did quite a big ride on the island, and all these other things. So I get the drive to ride that far, and like even looking at doing things like BC Epic and stuff like that in the future. But I it's always interesting hearing like you just sort of stepped in and then just you're like, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do, and then like
Yeah.
there wasn't even like a build up sort of thing from what it sounds like, but at the same time obviously there is. So what was that sort of early sort of transition? Because
Hmm.
you can't just go from being a runner and a rower, which I understand like both of those things help and work with that, but you can't just go from getting on a bike and just like going, yeah, I'm gonna start riding, to then obviously riding these massive distances. Was there, what was that build up like? How did you do that? Or was there always the goal of doing things like the Silk Mountain, or how's that work?
I mean, it's such a good question, and you're not going to love my answer because it was the first long distance thing I did happen 1 year after I bought my first gravel bike. To be fair, it was 1 year after.
Yeah.
But in terms of like preparation, easing into that, like I was grossly underprepared. I just was like, uh, I think after like, I mean, I really don't like when people tell me I can't do something. So I think that surgeon like really kind of he ignited a bit of a fire in terms of like, I'd be going for checkups and he was like, you really shouldn't be like, I was riding my bike every day. And he's like, that's a lot of exercise. Like, you could chill out a bit. And I think just that was part of it. And then I think I actually might have started working with, uh, maybe it was the year after, but at one point I worked with Laura Brown, who's a local
Mm.
to the North Shore, and I really wanted to work with a female coach, and so I worked with her, and I think maybe that was after my first big bike pack, but that was how I like really was able to like step up my training and things like that. But the first really big long distance thing was after a summer of doing really little island bike packs and little island hops. The first year I had my gravel bike, some point in the winter, I had been like obsessed with this bike packing the Rockies book, and I really was like, I don't know how I got it in my head, and I'll have to ask Jake, but I really wanted to go from Fernie to Lake Louise and back. No good reason for that other than I really, really wanted to go to Lake Louise because I'd never seen it. Um, and I wanted to do something big. I wanted to do something I'd never done before. And so I kind of concocted this goal, and then Rafa that winter posted like an Instagram story box being like, what are your 2021 riding goals? And so I put like bike pack from from Ferdy to Lake Louise and back. And then I get a message like a month later. I don't think anything of it. And they're like, this is a pretty big goal. Tell us more about this. And I was like, yeah, like I just started riding a year ago. I really want to get into bike packing. This would be like a hugely scenic thing. Like I've just like moved to Vancouver several years ago and I've never seen the Rockies, da 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 da. And like it would be a big celebration of like how far I've come from breaking my leg. And then they're like, okay, cool, we'll be in touch. And I'm like, what are you going to be in touch about? And then a couple weeks later, they're like, okay, so you've won our riding goals contest. And I was like, what?
Wow. Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, so we'll do like this Instagram spot on you and we'll send you all this kit and da 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 da. And I was like, oh shit, now I have to do this.
Yeah.
So
You put
that,
it out into the universe and now it happens.
yeah. And so that was like basically why, I mean, not, I wanted to do it because of me, but then I was like, there could have been excuses for not doing it, but I'd won this thing and they'd given me a bunch of stuff and I was like, well, it's real now. And so that was like well and truly my first off-road bike pack. It was a total of like just shy of 700 kilometers off-road. I'd never done anything multi-day like this ever. I was riding my bike maybe 200K a week. And I just, yeah, but it was the best. Like I think that diving headfirst is the best way to learn, and I'm comfortable doing that. So that was kind of the genesis story of the off-road. And then once you go that far, you're like, oh, I can get through all of that. I could do
Yeah.
anything. And then you just, your definition of what's hard changes every time you do something hard.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've got like so many questions on what you just said there, but I love that you just said the definition changes of hard because it's like exactly that. And this is such a side topic right now, but I've always believed in like putting yourself through like controlled stressful situations to make uncontrolled stressful situations like
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but it's yeah, so interesting and funny that you say that. But when when you got that like I guess message from Rafa saying, "Hey, like we want to back you to do this," did you feel the pressure change, or did you feel like your I don't even know how to describe it, but did you feel like there was almost like this pressure to succeed at this? Because whenever I've done any of these sort of outrageous goals for myself, I've always kept it fairly quiet, fairly local to who I tell and what I tell, just to make sure I have like the right support.
Yeah.
And then when I'm like, all right, I'm ready to pull the trigger, I'm going to do it within the next week. Like, one of them was like a 24-hour ride on the island. I was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, all right, this week I'm going to do this. I sent a message out to a bunch of people saying, hey, like, this is what the deal is. If you want to follow me, you follow me, sort of thing. But then didn't really put anything out until after the ride, because I kind of wanted it to be for myself without the
Mm-hmm.
pressure of having that. Like, did you feel that pressure change? Because I guess, like, originally the idea started for yourself,
Yeah.
but then Rafa obviously jumped on board. Like, and not that Rafa would have put any pressure on you, but obviously self expectations change.
Um, I think I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like I was like, oh, like who am I to be doing this? But then I kind of reminded myself, like, no, if somebody wants to back you, like they see value in whatever it is that you're doing, and like it doesn't really, like, no one said, hey, we want this to be the outcome. They're just like, this is going to be a really cool journey and we want to be here for it. And so that was kind of what I tried to remind myself of, like, going into it. And like in conversations beforehand, they were super lovely. Like I was like, okay, nobody expects anything of me. And naturally, like the plan, like some of the days weren't exactly the same as I had like planned out on paper. Like I did some course correcting along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think like the first little bit of the trip, it was more my self expectation that I was like, well, I said I'm going to do this and I want to do it. So I have to do it. Um, and then that kind of shifted as like I got more tired and I realized like, oh, some of your expectations of yourself are unrealistic. And so maybe you should adjust those. Um, and I gave myself permission to do that, which was really cool. Like Jake came with me and we did a rest day to get to
Mm-hmm.
Lake Louise. We took the free shuttle, or the $5 shuttle from Banff, where we were having our luxury motel, and we took the free shuttle, we saw Lake Louise, and then we rode home, and it was the best because I was so messed up from the first 2 days of riding, and I was kind of feeling like a bit of a chump for taking the bus there. But then I was like, nobody told me I had to ride this whole thing. Like, I'm not
No.
taking, like, nobody told me I had to get to Lake Louise. Nobody told me this was all your idea. And I'm so glad that I like learned that it was okay, because then the next day I had more energy. I felt good. And I was like, ah, you don't like, the plan is totally up to you, which was cool. But yeah, I think that answers the question of like, I
Yeah.
tried to keep the pressure mostly internal. And yeah, I mean, it's scary to tell people what the things that you want to do, but I'm like a little bit woo woo in that I'm like, if you put it out into the universe, the right people will support you, and you
For
never
sure.
know who resonates with what you're up to. So I was like, I think I would, like, if I was the outside looking in, like, this is the kind of thing I would want to know about, and like, I would want to cheer somebody on for. So I feel like I should share it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like such a great idea and such a great mentality too, because it's like, and I, same thing, I'm a massive believer in like the energy of the world, and people laugh at me a little bit, especially the people I live with. But it's sort of like, um, yeah, I fully believe in that, in the sense of like positive, like emotions and things like that will get that
Mm-hmm.
positive result. And it's sort of, exactly as you say, you put it out there, and people open doors for you, people open different boxes and things like that, and are able to support you and things. So I think that's, yeah, so awesome.
Yeah.
How was the trial by fire though? Like, what were some of those challenges?
Well, I bought all my bike packing gear based on what my partner has. Uh, I didn't test any of it. I didn't pre-fit anything to my bike. I just was like, oh, Jake has this gear. And I had no, like, at that time, I like loosely knew who Jenny Tuff was, if listeners are familiar with her. But like, I didn't quite fully understand that, like, you could reach out to these people and see if they would be willing to help you. I just was like, oh my God, she's amazing. So I just bought everything based on what Jake had, and quickly learned packing an extra small 48 centimeter bike totally different than that of like a size large that fits a 6'1" man, like totally different. So that
Yes.
was like number one, the packing conundrum of how do I fit everything on my tiny bike before we'd even leave the house. Like I was losing my mind about where everything would go. And then you figure out the Tetris game of getting everything on the bike. And I had never ridden like 100+ kilometer days back to back off road in the mountains. But, you know, on paper, you're like, oh, it's only 1,500 meters of elevation today, or it's only whatever. And it's totally different when you do it for the first time. I was like, the first day was super hot. We didn't leave early enough. We ended up on like a crazy hike a bike because I just was like, oh, this has heat map. Like it has tracks on heat maps. So surely people go over it. And turns out it was the first hike a bike they do in the Tour Divide, which is horrible. But I didn't know that because I was just like clicking on maps, and
Sure.
it was a recent addition to the race anyways at that point, and I don't even think I knew what the Tour Divide was, to be fair to me. So like how would I have known? So it was like the packing, the back-to-back days, had no idea how to deal with saddle sores. Like, oh my god, my butt was in the craziest state when we got to Banff that I was like, oh my god, I was googling flights. I was googling
Yeah.
flights home. Like but
That's
yeah, all
so
these
good.
things were just like, it was crazy. But then you I just like, yeah, we course corrected, we had that rest day, and then you do it and you're like, whoa, oh my, like my mind was, I couldn't compute it. Like the
Yeah.
last 20K into Fernie at the end, I was like, okay, I think we have to go like 1,000+ K next time. Like there's no way that 600-700 is long enough. Like I want to do something way longer. And Jake was like, this was one of the hardest bike packs I've done. Like, please, let's maybe sleep for a week before we talk about something new.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jake's the same one for sure.
Yeah,
But
he's a bit more sensible. I'm like, I am an action woman. Like if there's something I want to make happen, it's basically like a runaway freight train. There's not really much stopping it, for better or for worse. It's like the best and worst trait.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's like my girlfriend Alyssa as well, and me. It's sort of like exactly as you explain it. If she wants something to be done, it will happen,
Yeah.
whether there's any thought put into it all or it just has to happen. Versus like I feel like I'm somewhat relating to Jake a little bit here in the sense that we'll take a step back, we'll think through it, and then if it's like the risk versus reward weighs out, then we're like, yeah, let's do it. Like I can fully relate where he's coming from after things like that. But and
Yeah.
then so moving forwards from that first bikepacking trip, there's been a few different races you've done. What were
Yeah.
some of the highlights you've done through those?
Oh,
Like,
like races themselves or moments or
yeah, I guess just like in the sense of like it's been what 3 years since you've sort of really stepped into that world.
mhm.
How has that escalated to what you've just come back from with the Silk Mountain Road race? Like, obviously, from what I understand, you did that fairly early on as well. Like, you've done
It was
the
my
race
first
twice now.
race.
Okay.
It was my first race, which is just like, a lot of people were like, Mel, that is a stupid idea. You've never done an ultra endurance event. You've never done a bike packing race. Why would you fly halfway around the world to Kyrgyzstan? And I mean, like, it all is in line with who I am as a person. I was like enamored by the landscapes. I felt like a lot of connection to doing it. It helped that Jake was also going that year. But I really wanted to go. Like, I just thought, you know, there's no point in doing something half-assed. And that's not to say that like other events are half-assed, but I just didn't feel like it was worth doing an event that I felt lukewarm on. I wanted to do something that I felt really excited about, and that felt really exciting and really attractive to me, versus just like starting at something that I was like, I'm just going to tick the box and do a first one and get it out of the way. Like that's not my style. And I I guess like you could say failed epically because I got really sick and like scratched on the third day. And so scratching means like removing
Yeah.
yourself from the race. You cross your name out, blah, blah, blah. But I like, looking back, I'd do it exactly the same way because that got me absolutely hooked to like the broader community, all of it. Like it was the right thing for me. I can totally understand why people told me not to, but there were a select few people in my circle who were like, go for it. If this is what you want to do, then you should do it. But yeah, that was my first race. It's still the race that I think I will, even just bikepacking in Kyrgyzstan, like it is the most, it's just another planet, but that is, I think, the most magical like event, community, people. I could wax poetic about it forever, but I'm like my brain is still very much in Kyrgyzstan. I like have had the post race blues very badly this time around, so I'm like, oh, can we go again right now?
So tell me a bit more about that because, well, yeah, let's take a complete. I'm going to use your name, Detour here, and I'm going to spin that right in there.
That's exactly
Um,
why it's called that.
um, tell me a bit about the mental battles because anybody that's ridden
Yeah.
long distances or just done anything high exertion for a long time, you obviously go through massive waves of
Yeah.
highs and lows and emotions. And like even myself, I know there's been periods where like literally I'm crying while I'm riding my bike and I have
Yeah.
no idea why. And it's like not that I'm upset, it's just the emotion is so overwhelming. Like how do you deal with that? Because yeah, like where and how? Like obviously with the running and things like that, it's
Yeah.
helped build you to that point. What do you do?
I mean, I think it's really personal what works for people mentally. I mean, I find like the bike quite meditative, but the biggest thing that has really helped me like get through specifically lows is like everything is impermanent, everything will pass, and so if you can remind yourself that like none of these feelings are permanent, um it's really really helpful because it's like, okay, I feel really bad right now and it's fine to feel your feelings, but it will change. You're not going to feel like this forever. Like it really well and truly will change. And so that's been like the biggest thing that's helped me, get through any hard moments. And then like highs, I'm really trying to work on not like feeling too high,
Hmm.
because the flip side of a really high high is a crushing low. And so the more like feel the highs and embrace the highs, but like try and move, like especially when it comes to bike pack racing and this stuff specifically, because you're like, for the example of Silk Road, it's, I was on my bike for almost 2 weeks, and you can't lose your mind on the first day, right? Because you've got 13 more to go. So you really have to be like keeping your emotions in check while still embracing and feeling them and not just letting yourself get too carried away. So it's always like things are going to change and that's okay. But it's been it's been a road to like figure out how to just, and it changes too. I think you can't always be mentally strong. Like that is the biggest thing when people are like, how do you do these things? And like I I say I want to start the race over again and be doing it right now, but I think my brain personally needs more time to just not have to be that resilient,
Yeah.
because it's like any muscle, it gets really tired. And so you're not going to be able to be tough or resilient forever.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And it's like there's so many things you're saying that I'm relating to because um within the household, so I live with my girlfriend and then two other girls,
Yeah.
and we always talk about your emotion range of being +10 to -10, and they
Hmm.
call me the +2 -2 because of exactly what you're saying is I don't really get sad or negative by much, but
Hmm.
then on the flip side, I don't really get like overly excited. Like it's rare that I'll be bouncing off the walls with like excitement.
Hmm.
Um, but then like there is that extreme, and I think that it's quite interesting to hear you sort of talking about how you're trying to go through that and like build sort of almost like mental pathways to stop yourself getting too excited. And I
Yeah.
never really thought of it that way in the sense of uh, getting to a high peak of a like a happiness and then having the opposite in the way of like almost like a sugar crash
it,
of like
yeah.
it's like, and that's when I think about it now after you say that, it's like such a extreme opposite, and it does happen. And I've even with my personal riding, as I say, like I used to race like marathon lap races, and I would always say to whoever was pitting for me, at some point through this race, I apologize if I say something bad because I'll probably come through absolutely pissed off for
Yeah.
no real reason. And I'll probably just snatch the water bottle out of your hand, snatch whatever the food is that you're giving me, and ride off and not even acknowledge you. And I'm like,
Yeah.
please don't take that personally. And
Yeah.
it's like, so yeah, I fully get the like these highs and lows, and it's cool to hear how you're saying like you're working on not going too high, because I'd never thought of, yeah, working on that. I've always sort of working on like not going too negative, or like thinking about at the end of the day there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it may get a little worse but eventually it's going to get better.
Yeah.
But yeah, never thought of like the opposite of that in the
It
highs.
it's such a delicate dance because you want to feel the highs, you want to feel how amazing it is, and I'm not saying like totally turn your emotions off, but just like I've been guilty of being like, this is the best descent ever, I'm having the best day ever, and then as soon as things change, because they never stay the same, you maybe
Yeah,
hit terrible washboard, or it starts raining or whatever, and then like you experience the opposite of it, and I'm like, well, fuck, everything's horrible. And so if
yeah,
you can kind of just like level it out, I mean, when you said you're a +2 -2, I'm like a +11 -11. Like normally in my life I'm like off the spectrum on both ends, but that does not serve you well when it comes to bike pack racing, so I'm like trying to tone myself back in little ways, but still like feeling things deeply, because that's kind of the beauty of all of it.
yeah. And I think you still want to be able to feel that. Like personally, I actually wish that I had a wider range, and I don't know whether it's just because I've competed for so long that I don't have that range. And it's almost like I'm trying to work on that now to feel more, but um, it definitely helps when things get stressful for you not to be stressed. Like it's interesting. There's actually a really good Brazilian jiu-jitsu book called Breathe. So
Oh,
if you're into reading,
yeah.
which I think you are, look that book up, and it's yeah, it's all about learning how to stay calm, because obviously those guys, when someone's got their legs wrapped around your head ready to break your arm,
Yeah.
if you're stressed out, like obviously it's not going to go well. So it's
Yeah.
like there's it's the story about how Brazilian jiu-jitsu came to America, but there's all of these like little, I don't even know what you want to call them, like little stories within it to teach you how to be calm, and like
Yeah.
um just yeah, it's kind of really cool to read. But yeah, have a read of that because that's like one of my favorite books, I would have to think.
Super
um
cool. Yeah, I'm very into that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah, it's really sweet. um Moving forwards a bit in the sense of like women in cycling, and like
Yeah.
your advocate, I can't even pronounce that word right now, but like community and things like
Mhm.
that. I know you're like all about that and trying to get people out there, and like different participations and stuff like that. Tell me a bit about that, because I know obviously you've got a lot of different things happening with that. How's that happening?
Uh, I don't even know. It's funny. Like, I think I grew up kind of being like, oh, girls suck. And I was like, when I was rowing, I was a coxswain, which is the person who steers and blah, blah, blah. That's irrelevant. But you can be on the men's team. And so I always wanted to be on the men's team. I was like, women's sports is too emotional. It's too blah, blah, blah. I never wanted to be on the women's team. And then eventually, the only varsity seat that was available to me, and at the time, you could only compete on the national team on the women's team. So I was like, shit, if I actually want to go to the national team, I better like get over my issues with girls and go be on the women's team. And I like really learned. just like how amazing it can be when women support women. I think that like the narrative around, there's not like there historically has not been enough space for women in sports or just in any opportunities. And so that's resulted in this narrative of like pitting women against each other. That's like kind of the history. There's not enough room for all of us. And when I like felt that for the first time of what it was like to actually have like women lifting each other up and supporting each other, I was like, wow, I want more of this in my life. Like, I don't know how that's going to manifest, but just like that experience was really positive. And yeah, fast forward to cycling, and the people who work at the bike shop are dudes. Most people on the road are dudes. Middle-aged dudes in lycra love to drop you if you pass them. Like,
Yeah.
and I was just like, I like there has to be a better way than just doing things they've always done. So, I mean, I frankly don't think I do that much for women's cycling, but I feel strongly that there needs to be more women in the sport. And so, whatever I can do, which, like, I think the best way I can do that is by sharing my own experiences so that people feel less alone. That's why Detours was born, because I was like, every podcast is hosted by a guy, and that's great. Like, there are some really good shows, but the perspective of a woman is so different than that of a man. And I think that the more we can have more voices in the room, the more inclusive it's going to become. So that's kind of how I don't even like, I think I was just frustrated of being like, there's dudes everywhere, and I'm so tired of it. And you can either wait for things to change or you can change them yourself. And in the theme of being an action person, I'm too damn impatient to wait for things to change. So I was like, well, I guess I just got to do some stuff. But that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, I think that's all like pretty fair because at the end of the day, you're right. Like, there's nothing, I guess, nothing stopping women getting on bikes and riding bikes, but at the same time, it is very intimidating. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even when I first moved to Canada, it's like you go into a bicycle store, and if nobody knows who you are, there is that intimidation of like,
Mm-hmm.
do they think that I'm cool enough? Do they think that I'm able to talk the talk, or are they just going to laugh and snicker at me because I don't know the name of a specific trail or something? So, like, I think
Yeah.
that's like such an interesting thought on that. But I want to ask a question because this came up between a few different people, both male and female, in a
Yeah.
conversation I was having the other week. And I feel like it's such a good opportunity because of what you're, and I didn't know this until right now. So, but because of what you just said about like in the rowing teams and
Mm-hmm.
wait, like wanting to be part of the male thing,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel that there's a point with like, how do I explain it? Like, is there a point that women's sport will resegregate itself in the sense of like women's only groups and women only, like, I understand if it's like a men's and women's event and you have separate
Mm-hmm.
classes, or it's like a women uh like a women specific event
Yeah.
that allows like other genders to participate in, but it's based around women. Like, I understand that, and I think that's great. But do you think there's a point where when women are like, no men are allowed, no partners, no allies, no nothing, it's only women? Do you
Mm-hmm.
think that then becomes where it like re-separates itself, or do you think that's just a good point for women to get involved before they step into the full inclusivity?
I think that like realistically we're so far away from having it be like, sport being an equal 50-50 split, so I have like a difficult time imagining that. However, um I think the reason, at least present day, like women's only spaces are so important is because, like, if I think about myself, I show up to a group ride and it's any gender is welcome. You can identify with whatever gender you want. I show up and I look around me and I'm looking for the other women in the room. And it becomes about like looking for those women. And then there's maybe three of us in a group of like 15 people. And whereas when you go to a woman's only ride, you're not looking around for the other people who are like you. You're already immediately in like a base level place where everybody has a shared commonality. And yes, you were at a group ride where you all want to cycle, but you like by separating, at least at the beginning, like having women's only spaces, it really is like, okay, it breaks down a barrier. It's really easy, or not really easy, but it's much easier to like make a new friend or be in the mix or ask a silly question, because you you're not looking for, you're not looking for the other women. It's all, that space is already there for you. So at least right now, I'm like, I think it's really important to have women's only spaces. Perhaps one day when like women are ruling the world and you rock up to a group ride and there's 6 women and 3 dudes, sure. Like maybe we can talk about being like, this is maybe exclusive, but I think the reality is like, we've just
It's
been,
probably never going to get to that point. Yeah,
yeah,
and
I mean, if we
that's
get to 50-50, amazing. And I am like,
yeah,
there's events and stuff like that that are getting there, but uh when we remove like gender as the thing that brings us all together, or like, I said that poorly, but like when it, when it's just like a women's only space, it breaks down a barrier, and it's a lot easier to at least like get your foot in the door.
yeah, no, and I completely agree, and it's, as I say, it's sort of this ongoing topic that I'm always interested to hear from different people that come from different areas to
Yeah.
how that looks. And I'd never heard of anybody start with like like women's sport sucks as a woman, and then eventually like full change, and then go to that point, because it's sort of, yeah, as I say, it's obviously such a controversial topic and a hard
Yeah,
thing to talk about. And but it, yeah, as you're talking, I'm like, I should ask, because it's just one of those things. But
totally.
um yeah, I think like, yeah, completely fully agree with what you're saying, in the sense of there needs to be those spaces to help people get into the sport, and whatever gender you want to identify as, like, completely fine.
Hmm.
But then at the same point, like, eventually, like, using those as stepping stones to then be in a mixed group scenario, if you feel
Hmm.
comfortable, I guess, is
Hmm.
such an interesting thing.
Yeah.
But um I completely lost my train of thought again.
It's all good.
um okay, so I guess moving forwards from that, what are some of the future goals and things like that you've got? Like, you've just come back from the second time around
Yeah.
at Silk Mountain. You unfortunately had a pretty
Oh,
pretty sad ending, I want to put it as.
yeah.
Um, is there plans to go back again and try and knock it on its head, or is there
Yes.
other goals?
I mean, there's always other goals, but I mean, I said to like everybody before I went to Silk Road, I was like, I love it so much that I foresee myself going back no matter what happens this year. And it just so happens that my race was ended 200 kilometers shy of the finish, which after riding 1,700, 200 really feels like nothing. But um, yeah, and like for context for people to understand, that is basically my pedal broke. Jake took my pedal, and then my pedal, pedals are supposed to tighten
Hmm.
themselves when you're pedaling. It kept falling out of his crank and then eventually dethreaded his crank. So then we were down a pedal and a crank. And bike shops are very hard to come by in Kyrgyzstan. There's only like 1 or 2 really good ones, air quote, in the capital. And then the odds of finding a pedal are like very low, but an odds of finding a crank are like the right one for his bike are non-existent. So that was basically that. But yeah, I mean, I obviously want to go back. I want to finish. In some ways, I do feel like I finished. And when I say that, I mean, like, I got everything I wanted to out of the race, except for just having like a stamp on a piece of paper that represented the finish line. Like, when I look at my goals for the event, and also just like my goals for my own personal growth, I feel like I achieved all of those. And so I feel really fulfilled from the experience, but I'm like, oh, I rode so far to not even get my stupid 4th stamp. And that 4th stamp is a big deal. To be clear, it's a very big deal.
Yeah,
But
it's huge.
I, so I am going to go back and try and finish it. But I also think like you can't, with these events where so little is in your control, you cannot hinge the value of your experience on a finish, because
Mm.
there's just so many things that could happen that if that's all you're going for, then your odds are like 50-50 in that case, which like I don't like those odds. So I have other reasons for going back other than wanting to finish, but that's definitely a big motivator.
Yeah, and I think like it's that old classic saying of like it's the journey, not the
Yeah,
destination,
exactly.
is exactly what you're saying. But like, how would you like? I know you had other hiccups, like you got sick,
Oh yeah.
you you had daily meltdowns, as we were talking about earlier. Like, how what would you like? Obviously, going back for a third time, you're learning every time you go back.
Yeah,
You're obviously not going to take a spare bike because that's
I
not
am
going
going
to
to
happen.
purchase
But
new pedals because apparently they're supposed to be serviced once a year, but me, I just ran
they are,
my.
yes.
Yeah,
If
so those
yeah,
pedals had never been serviced, and they, to be like, in hindsight, they were making a clicking noise before the race started, but I just was like, oh, bikes click, like,
yeah,
whatever.
they make
And
noise.
the bearings were dead. So that was a lesson for me of being like, okay, I actually had basically all new parts of everything on my bike going there, which like the organizer Nelson tells people like you should have a new drivetrain, you should have new tires, like the wear and tear is crazy. Like don't
Mm.
risk it. You should have new stuff as expensive as it is. Like if you're doing this, give yourself the best chance. That also applies to your pedals, but I never considered that. And now I'm like, okay, new pedals or serviced pedals is one thing I'm for
But
sure
like,
going to do differently.
I could think of how many bikes my single set of pedals have gone through. Like, it's yes, they are meant to be serviced, and I fully get that as a mechanic and side of things. But if you ask most people, they've probably had the same pedals for the past 5 years. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, it's just very unlucky. But then at the same time, how many people ride 2,000 kilometers in a year, let alone in 14 days?
Yeah, exactly.
Is I
Like,
think the key there.
yeah, those pedals have seen some shit and they should have been they should have been replaced or at minimum serviced, and now I know that, and it's like a, like you said, I'm learning every time I do it, and I did everything. I think I did everything else right except for that one thing, and I could have even done that right and something else could have happened, like we don't know, but
For sure.
I'm a little mad that that was the one thing that was not on my like list of things to repair, and I'm like, ah, why do you
Yeah, it's
have to
like
learn? Like, why does
it's
it
that
have to be a
$2
bad
piece that
lesson?
destroys it.
Yeah.
Um, and then you also had the hires of 13 ice creams in how many days?
13 in 13 days. However, I ate 5 on the first day of the race because it was 40 degrees Celsius. Um, and like people will say, oh, 13 ice creams over 13 days. That's actually not that much when you break it down. It is a ton when you actually like look at the list of available resupply, and
Yeah.
you're like maybe getting to a shop once a day, sometimes every 2 or 3 days. So it's like really you don't have much opportunity to buy ice creams. But yeah, I fell off the wagon after day one. So next year I'm going to eat 20.
Oops.
Oh, we
Are
got a
you
little
there?
leg. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, we got a little lag. Go on from so sorry, you were saying that it was every sort of like quite a fair way between all the different stops and things like that. So
Yeah.
to get that many ice creams, it's almost like you need to treat yourself in between.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But next year I'm gonna do, so Joe Nation, who we talked about before the show started, but he
Mm.
told me when I interviewed him, he would get 3 at a shop instead of like I was getting 2 at a shop. He was getting 3. And so I was like, "Oh, fair play. Like they're really really frozen. I should just get
Okay.
more next time and eat them on the go." I mean, I ate one on the go every time, but yeah.
So, but do you then also carry like a freezer bag of some sort to keep your food in, or
No,
how?
you're no,
Yeah, I was
you're
like, I'm like, how? But like they're that frozen that they're staying cold enough in between.
Well, I mean, you're eating them
Like,
like, okay, when he bought 3, he's like eating 3 back to back. So it's like you eat one and then you eat the next
oh,
one and then
okay.
you eat the
I thought
next
you meant he
one.
was like
So
hanging on to him. I'm like, he'd be drinking it by the third one
you
if he
would
waited an
be,
hour, like in 40
yeah.
degrees. That's insane.
Yeah, you would be waiting, but you could probably get to the third one on most days that aren't super hot without it completely melting.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're coming up to close to an hour.
Yeah.
I've got so many more things I want to ask you, but one of the last big things I wanted to talk about, and we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but uh, like your evergreen design and things like that. How how did that come about? Because I think that's the first time I'd ever heard of you in the cycling world, and I don't even know if you were cycling at that point, because I'm trying to think about the time frame of when that would have
I
been. But was that
definitely
like,
I was new. I was really new. But maybe it must have been the second year. I think it was actually before we went on that bike pack to Fernie. It was actually, yeah, it was right about that time. It was the second year I was riding. And I don't know how I got connected with Krista and Andrew, but I do know what spurred it was I drew this like lady on a bike graphic. It was like a hot pink graphic and the lady's naked on a bike. And I got it printed on t-shirts and I sold a bunch of t-shirts. And I guess they saw it like because I had like through Jake and then becoming in the community, and Krista reached out and she was like, I love this. Could we do like some artist collab? And that was really how that came about. But it's funny because I was like, I've always wanted to share my art, but I've always been so nervous to do it because I'm like, oh, it's so bad. And I say that because I'm like, art is so subjective, and I have like so many people I look up to, and I'm like, who am I to be doing these things? But then I'm like, you know what? If it excites you, you should just go for it. So yeah, they saw that, and then they reached out, and we were off to the races.
yeah, yeah, and it was sick. It was such a cool jersey, and it like just popped up everywhere, and it was like,
It was
it
so
obviously,
cool.
yeah, it was quite interesting because obviously the like whole naked lady on the bike thing gets a lot of attention, but then at the same time it was just like every second person that I saw on a group ride had one of these jerseys. I'm like, what and where are these coming from? But then, yeah, there you go. No,
I get
that's
so
so awesome.
excited when I see them in the wild. I'm like, and people will send me photos, and it's so cute. And I'm like, it's definitely one of my like proudest things I've ever worked on. And yeah, that was the coolest. I'd love to do something else like that. I shouldn't say I have no good ideas right now, but I'm like, I'd love to do something like that again.
No, yeah, yeah. As I say, it was a really good jersey. Well, it still is a really good jersey. So,
Yeah.
no, props
Thanks.
to you. Um, yeah. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to mention, or is there what's the best way for people to get in contact? Obviously, you've got your podcast and on
Yeah.
Instagram and things like that.
I love Instagram. I know people hate on social media, but I'm like, because believe it or not, I'm actually incredibly socially anxious. Like I have really bad social anxiety. I hate group rides. I really don't like parties. I really really struggle in those settings, but I love the internet and I love social media because there's like you can send a DM to anybody and introduce yourself to anybody, and there's like the worst thing that happens is they don't answer you, but
Mm,
you don't actually have to like deal with that in person. So I'm like, okay, great. So I make lots of internet friends and I love it for that reason. But then I also like follow through and meet like have a lot of friends because of the internet. So yeah, Instagram is the best way for people to follow what I'm up to. And yeah, you should listen to Detours if you like bikes and women and blah blah blah. That's my podcast. It's a lot of fun.
it is, and it's so good that you mentioned it earlier about like how many men have podcasts and
Hmm.
then how little women have, and it's like I've been listening to it for a little while now, and it is really good to listen to. So
Oh,
yeah, it's
thank
good
you. I
quality.
appreciate it. Thank you. Yours
No,
is great too. I'm stoked to be a guest, which is cool.
no problems at all. Well, yeah, thank you for coming on. And if anyone's got any questions for Mel,